Warning, incoming game over. Warning, incoming game over.
Now, for the third segment tonight, I think just for how the show has gone, I'm going to make this sort of the final segment because we've got a lot in this one and not too much chat activity tonight as people are not exactly enthused about the Sens scoring
Can't blame
zero
them.
goals, zero goals in the last two games. So I think I'm going to make this one big final segment here is that Louis has his own stats model and his own stats website, which you can, of course, check out. It's lbhockey.com, right?
Yeah, exactly. I can post the link in the chat if
For sure.
if the handful of chatters that are still sticking with us. Shout out to you, by the way. If you're staying up at 10:43 p.m. Eastern after that Sens win, listen, you're Sens pilled just like us, and I love to see it.
And I'll get the link in the description for the VOD and the podcast upload as well. But yeah, you have got these statistical models here where you've also got the graphics to represent the stats too. So I've just put up the first one on the screen that we're going to take a look at here tonight, which is Tim Stützle and specifically the improvement of his defensive play this season. So this is we've been talking about the Sens being unable to score, but of course they do have that increased defensive ability, and Tim Stützle has really been at the center of it. Even though he's not hitting those insane offensive numbers that he had 2 years ago, the improved defensive play can help this team win games, and it has been this season. So what are we seeing here? If you want to explain the chart there.
Yeah, so this is my player progression viz. It helps you look at any sort of different skills that a player develops or regresses in over a span of the last 4 years. And I here, as you can, there's a bit of a drop down at the top. Obviously, you can select your player top left, but at the top middle, there's different categories. For example, here is shutdown. So the combination of transition defense, which is when you're staying back to help your defenseman as a forward in terms of preventing the opposition from moving forward into the zone, your suppression ability within the defensive zone, ability to mitigate chances, and checking, whether that's through physicality, retrieving pucks, helping in front of the net on either side. And there's a bunch of different combinations you could go for that, whether you want scoring, mixing your passing and your shooting. But yeah, Timmy's defense has gone nuclear this year. I don't know what has happened and what's turned. Probably it's just some focus on that with the coaching staff in this offseason. But as you could see, it's the axis for the main graph here for the line chart is in percentiles. And he's gone from being historically probably around a bottom quarter in the league in terms of shutdown ability, and all of those just together. He's got that Travis Green bump, and they all jumped up together into the 75th percentile roughly, and he's easily becoming an actually good defensive center, which is huge for a guy that has that much dynamic ability. As we can see which skills exactly are driving that. He's gotten really good at immediately stopping pressure in the defensive zone and putting on more shadowing onto the puck and allowing him to disrupt any sort of possessions that the other team might have. His ability to prevent the other team from breaking the puck out and putting more pressure on them there. Not turning the puck over is the thing that's been huge with his wrist now being back to full health. He's got way more confidence on the breakout, and that means he's not turning the puck over nearly as much. And as a result, it's just driving really good numbers. He's not afraid to go into the corners. And all of that is really displayed here with how it's driven him to be just a much better player overall this year. And if he can drive that into, two-way results moving forward on top of continued progress offensively and getting back to, as we said, potentially 35, 40 goal status, that'd be absolutely massive.
Mm-hmm. The thing I like about the increase in Stützle's defensive ability is that, like, when you think about his offensive ability, the best traits for his offense are his skating and his stick handling, and I feel like he's been able to use those two skills for like both sides of the game now, both sides of the puck. Specifically with the skating, he's a one-man breakout. Like a lot of teams will have that defenseman that breaks the puck out, but for us we just give it to Timmy. And the stick handling too with that, he's able to make those little stick handles that where previously I feel like he'd be turning the puck over a lot more, but I feel like he's learned the type of moves that work and the type that don't work, and we're seeing a lot less of those turnovers on the breakout than we did, like, especially last season. So I feel like he's really he's using the skills that are his best traits, and he's been able to apply those to the defensive side of the puck too, in terms of keeping the puck, not turning it over as much, and of course the speed helps with like puck retrievals and back checking and stuff like that too.
Yeah, exactly. Like as you said, the he used to turn it over a good bit, and he had the lowest like puck management score in the defensive zone in my model across the entire season last year.
Was that for the whole league or the
The
team?
whole league, the
Oh,
entire league. It was bad. It was not good.
wow.
And listen, like it's more of a 30 game-ish, 30, 40 game-ish tracked sample set for all the micro stats and the manually tracked stuff. But that's still significant. Like that's not good. By the way, for
Hmm.
defenseman, it was Jacob Chikrin. But
Oh,
that's yeah, it was
so
a tough
that might be
time
a
to
little
beat
bit
them.
of a DJ Smith hockey effect too.
Exactly, a little bit of that. But that's the thing is Timmy now, if I pull it up here, in his single season card, which we'll see Shabbat soon. Yeah, it's a strength now. It's gotten like 85th percentile. It's
Wow.
unbelievable how he's just been able to not just get that efficiency just skyrocketing, but also keep up the volume. He's
Hmm.
still retrieving pucks at the exact same high rate. He's still breaking the puck at with the same level of efficiency and turning them into zone entries and exits as often as he always is. And just putting all that together, that's done a huge jump for him in terms of just being able to suppress any sort of chances when he's on the ice because he's getting the puck out so much easily, right? He's not, turning it over and giving the opportunity to the other team to get more chances. So it's been really nice to see, and I'm hoping this is sustained for the rest of his career because if it is, holy crap, we've got a beast on our hands.
Yeah, I think he got a bit of a reputation early on as just like high flying offense only, but he's really rounding out into a two-way player. And also with the card mentioning like the transition disruption, the forechecking as well, I feel like his physical play has gone up this year too. Like his someone keeps posting the stats of like I think it's Kachuk, Stutzla, and someone else who they're like way up in the league in terms of guys who have a certain number of points and a certain number of hits too. And I feel like Stützle was not really throwing that many hits at all in his career up until this season. Like I remember seeing it a little bit in when he was in Germany and in the World Juniors as well. He had a little bit of a physical edge to his game, but then we didn't see it as much as he came over to the NHL in his first couple of years. But I feel like he's added that element to his game too, which just helps the defensive side of the game too if you're able to use your body effectively.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why the checking's gone up so so drastically here in this dashboard. Like he's I think he's always been, or always in the last 2 or 3 years, I mean, he's been physical. Like for those who have had him in fantasy leagues, he's still getting his hit volume. The problem is how much was he turning that into, puck retrievals, whether
Right.
it was helping him on the forecheck. He was getting those hits, and the Sens were just very hit heavy team, and they have been. But this year, holy, like he's turning it into retrievals and puck steals whenever he's forechecking, way more than he had at any point in the past. So
Hmm.
I'm just really happy to see it, and I can't wait to see how he continues to develop moving forward.
Yeah. Just out of my own curiosity, I pulled up the hit numbers real quick, and last season, over 75 games, he finished with 100 hits, and this season he's already at 78. So that's trending up quite a bit. You can see the increase in the physical play right there. So yeah, Tim Stützle overall, specifically the defensive play, a huge bright spot for the Sens this season. And speaking of defensive play, we have also got a player card for Thomas Chabot here with lots of different stats here. So the other one was sort of the player progression of how they go from year to year. What do we see on this card here for Thomas Chabot?
Yeah, so these are the single season player cards. I've got data going all the way back to 2020-21 season. So everything is post pandemic. And there's still a bit of an overall track record if you want to see how his the SPAR percent here, which is the percentile of SPAR, aka standings points above replacement. So that's the overall score in my model. A lot of people use WAR. This is just, in my opinion, using standings points is more, it's just easier to understand in a sport like hockey where you're not
Mm-hmm.
relying on winning percentage, you're relying on standings points. So looking at this year, for example, he's on pace to contribute 5.2 standings points above replacement, which is a whole lot for a defenseman, especially who's not necessarily getting those number one minutes anymore. And that's helped him a ton, right? As we could see here, this is easily the most detailed dashboard that I have. There's a bunch of different data points grouped up into a bunch of different categories. As we can see, he's a top 50 player in the league this year, top 3 player on the Sens, almost a top 10 defenseman. And
Yeah.
it's just been a joy to watch him, right? Like, because he's just got that smooth skating ability back, right? He has been fighting an injury. I think I wrote about this again in the Sens Path to the Playoffs article when I did the defenseman. The first guy I wanted to ride on was Chabot because he had mentioned that he'd been kind of on and off nursing. I think it was a wrist injury as well, right? Over the last couple years. I could probably go and double check.
I think, yeah, I remember the wrist being injured. He had a few injuries, but specifically the wrist
Yeah.
last season, I remember.
Yeah, it was Chabot divulged that he had been dealing with a wrist issue the last couple of years and finally felt back to 100% there. Obviously, he'd been plagued with a lot of injuries, but that was the one that kind of stayed with him and never fully healed. And as we saw with Timmy, we know that that's really going to help you because it affects your entire play selection and how you roll on the ice. And as a result, his ability to create for himself way back up. His playmaking is still there. He's utilizing his teammates a ton. He's establishing himself as potentially the most important player in the Senators offense with how his influencing plays, how everything is flowing through him and how efficient he's being there. And I think part of the defensive jump for him on the zone defense side, which is in the 78th percentile, and I think that might be the highest it's been in a while for him, is just he's been so good offensively and with the puck that the other team doesn't have as much of a chance defensively, and that's driving a lot of the increase in numbers there. But the fact that he's also back to his past self, being such a good breakout option now again, because I think that had taken a bit of a dip over the last couple of years. You know, he was still skilled, but nowhere near as efficient, and now it's back up. Like I was just hoping to see him back to that peak of like 2021-22, where he was just all over the ice, one of the best puck carrying defensemen in the game, one of the highest involved or most involved players, and it seems like he's back to doing that. It's just so great, and shocker that it happens now that he's got a proper partner and he's not playing 30 minutes a night. Like, who could have predicted that?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is it feels very vindicating for the fan base specifically, and specifically the Thomas Chabot fans, because the number one thing we've been saying ever since Dylan DeMello was his partner is, one, he needs an actual proper defense partner, and two, he needs to not be playing 30 minutes a night. And would you look at that both of those things have come true, and all of a sudden he's just making a huge impact for the Sens. And what's really interesting to me is that if you just looked at the normal stat line of the offensive production, you'd be thinking, oh, he's having kind of like a middling year in terms of, you know, the points that Chabot has been able to put up in the past. But with the advanced stats, he gets such a good offensive rating, which is really interesting to me. I do remember, I can't remember the last time that I looked at the stat, but there was a stat that Chabot was on the ice for the most goals for of any defenseman. Which is funny too, because we were just talking in the previous segment about how the Sens are not scoring 5-on-5 goals at all. So I think that puts it really into perspective too, is that the Sens are so bad at scoring at 5-on-5, especially lately, but Chabot is on the ice when they do score. So what do you think it is that it may not be translating to huge production in terms of the points, but he's still like carrying the play and putting up these big advanced stats numbers for the offense?
Well, one thing that I like a lot about the stats that I track, and this is a huge shout out. If I were ever to give a shout out to anyone for having this project be possible, it's to Corey Schneider from All Three Zones. He runs an absolutely incredible ship over there, and he makes all the data that he manually tracks available. And I've always found that it's been way more translatable in terms of what he tracks and the detail and the type of stats that he tracks to the eye test and what you're seeing happen. And this is why you're able to get way more meaningful stylistic metrics here and there that you might not be able to pull from, you know, what's easily his lowest production pace in the last 4 years, right? Like usually he'd be on pace for low 50s, mid 40s in points, but now I think he's only on pace for 35 or something. And it's probably gone down since today, even given we didn't score. But I think really what's helping him so much is he's historically been a very good driver of offense. Like when he's on the ice, their expected goals for per 60, the rate at which they're generating chances and pressure has always been good. And I think a lot of that is obviously skating is helping him, but he is just so involved offensively. Everything is flowing through him. He's using his teammates a ton, and he's always putting himself in a spot to really help progress any sort of possession towards a shot, or to at least not turn it over. So I think that's been a huge part of his game in terms of just always knowing where to put himself into how he wants any sort of play to continue. That it's really helped his ability to be on the ice for goals, expected goals, and any sort of chance. Sure, it hasn't resulted in any sort of offense this year, but if I look at the badges that I have for him in my other dashboards, he's got the gold breakout candidate badge. Like, he is one of the most likely defensemen to outproduce his current production based on the track data I have on him. So it's only a matter of time if he keeps playing like this until he really sees a jump there. And it's maybe there's some power play stuff going in there like we talked about that could help that jump. But I'm excited to see how his production pace improves over the second half of the season, because there's no way it can go anywhere but up.
Yeah, you're right about the power play too, because Sanderson himself has like 12 power play points or something like that, and then there's the absolute reverse of Chabot, where he's not really on the ice for that many goals for at 5v5, which just really shows Chabot's impact this year, is that if the Sens are scoring, Chabot is out there. And yeah, all these advanced stats can really let you know how a player is doing compared to just looking at the surface level stats. So if you want to see more of these, remember you can go to lbhockey.com, get a subscription over there. He has these for the whole league, right? Pretty much the whole league.
Yeah, as long as they have played like not a small amount of minutes. Like, I don't have I don't know. I don't have any David Perron stats for this season because he's barely played.
Yeah.
But I did make an exception. I think it was last year when Cruikshank had played just a few games and had some managed. I was like, I got to know.
You had to do it for your boy.
Like, I knew it would be heavily regressed, and sure enough, he was like 50th percentile because barely anything was allowed to not be pushed back to the league average. But exactly, that's the thing, is as long as the player has played in the NHL as kind of a regular, you could argue, I got data on all of them from the last 5 years.
Yeah. So if there's any players that you're curious about to do a deep dive on their stats, be sure to go to LB Hockey and check that out. Now, the next one we have is a goalie comparison between Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark. And it's really interesting just on the surface level how this has played out this year, with the two teams being very close in the standings. Obviously, Boston pulling ahead tonight. But they have like almost identical records, and yet Jeremy Swayman has considerably worse stats than Linus Ullmark, which, to be honest, is a kind of a surprise to me. I figured that heading into the season, Ullmark's stats would take more of the dip, playing on a worse defensive team, although they've improved, obviously, which is a huge part of it. And you'd think that Jeremy Swayman would just keep on rolling in Boston, but it's not quite turned out that way, whereas I think Swayman had a really tough start, and so did Ullmark, but Ullmark has really turned it around since then. Swayman, not so much. So what do we see here through your model on these two goalies?
Yeah, so we can see that there's not a ton of differences in terms of their play styles. There's some things here and there, but they have roughly similar shapes, except for Swayman being a much more athletic goalie and Ullmark being way better at anticipating play. The thing is, those are still pretty big differences, but on other aspects, they're fairly close. One thing that I have on these dashboards here is ideal system, and it can be a little wonky. I kind of like to think about it as plus minus in a way where it's really interesting when you look at the extremes, but aside from that, it might not help a ton. But we look at Swayman, and Boston already is his ideal system here.
Yeah, fits like a glove, eh?
Exactly.
Despite
problem
that,
is,
though, that his numbers are down.
Exactly. And I think the big thing for me is going into the season, everybody was talking about how, Sens, watch out with Ullmark because he's never been a full starter. And nobody was, I didn't see much talking about Swayman because he was in the exact same boat.
Yeah, people just kind of assumed that Swayman would be able to handle it just fine, and then with Ullmark,
they're not like, Ullmark.
Yeah. For some reason, he didn't get the benefit of the doubt as much. Maybe part of that is just because he was moving to the Sens with a lesser reputation for defensive play. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of funny how that works out.
Yeah, funnily enough, I mean, you can't see it on this one, but if I go and dig into the data, Sens are 10th on Ullmark's ideal system list, which is still not bad at all, right? Because he's recently, anyway, with how they've been playing, and this is current iteration of the Sens, right? The Travis Green Sens, who are allowing, I'd like to say, less high danger chances than the previous regime. And that's good for Allmark. He's a very good, consistent goalie. And any sort of low danger stuff where he doesn't have to scramble, doesn't have to, face any sort of high pressure and really exert his body and just completely let his ability to think and see the game super well take over. That's really helping him. And as a result, he's able to play really well here. The thing with Swayman, despite having Boston so high up, is that he's got so much more exertion hitting him now with more games having to be played. I don't know if he's had to go through any injuries this year. Maybe that could be playing into that. But like it's cut is, I'd say, his performance almost all the way in half in terms of what he's been able to accomplish, right? Like he's around a league average goalie now, which if you're Boston, you need that to be higher. You need him to be significantly above league average, like he seemed to be on pace for, to be one of those top 10 goalies in the league. Like, when you think about those top goalie echelons, there's really maybe only 6 or 7 that you can count on to be really good every year. And if you're Boston and you want to be able to compete, you need that.
Before the season, I would have grouped Swayman into that category.
Me too.
Of like, so it's taken a bit of a dip. Maybe with the ideal system, there's also just a bit of a factor of the Bruins not executing their system as well. Like the best case scenario, which they have been doing for being so good for the past like decade or whatever, of when their system is clicking as intended. Obviously, that's going to be great for the goalies and specifically Swayman's play style. But they did have the coach firing and all that this year, so their performance has dipped overall, and that definitely plays into the drop in stats for Swayman. One other thing that I'd like to ask about on the card is for both goalies there at the bottom, it's GSAR, which I believe is goals saved above replacement, I would think, per game.
Yes, exactly.
What I'm curious about is obviously Ullmark seems to have a way higher number than that for Swayman, but I'm curious so for example, Ullmark's 0.8, where would that rank? Is that like really high, or like what's kind of the scale for that stat?
Yeah, so this is the way this is calculated essentially is that you try to standardize. You have to imagine like what would be the most normal game that a goalie could have in terms of shot quantity and shot quality, and using all of the faced shot attempts, shots, and expected goals that these faced over a season. You can use their performance on that to scale how many goals they would be expected to stop in an average game, because goalies in different systems are going to face different amounts of all of those. And as a result, you can't really use raw expected goals saved per 60 because goalies might just face more per shot or all of that. But yeah, so for this exact number, it converts almost directly to standings points using essentially a goals per win calculation, which changes over every season depending on how many goals you expect to score in a season and how that translates to standings points. But for Allmark, I have to go to the multi-year cards actually for this, not the single season. But him stopping around 0.8 gets him very high up, like around 96th percentile, which I think only means there's Hellebuck and Shesterkin ahead of actually Logan Thompson's. Oh no, hold on.
He would be there. I'm sure he is.
Yeah, but like, sorry.
So it's top 5 pretty much.
It is top 5. Yeah, top 5, maybe even top 3. Logan
awesome.
Thompson's a curious case because it's just this season for him that's driving that result, whereas on these cards, this is a 3-year average, weighted average.
You were looking at the aggregate of the last few years there.
Exactly, with more weight being put towards the recent seasons, whereas Thompson would be overall might be a little higher, but that GSAR, due to it being weighed and not being as high in previous seasons, it's higher this year for sure.
Yeah,
he's been unreal. I still can't believe he was snubbed by Team Canada for 4 Nations.
Absolutely ridiculous. They showed us a graphic on the broadcast today of like the 6 goalies for Canada, and the 3 guys that they picked were the 3rd or the 4th, 5th, and 6th out of those 6 rankings. So they botched that, didn't they?
Well, they went for Jordan Binnington. Of course they botched it. Listen,
like, oh my god. And like Sam Montembeault has the ability, but just is straight up just not as good as Logan Thompson this year. It's like not even close. Like Logan Thompson is playing himself into in like a Vezina conversation at this point too. So that's a topic for another day. But damn, the goalie evaluations at Team Canada might not exactly be up to snuff. But we've got awesome goalie evaluations at lbhockey.com for sure.
Yes.
And now I think we'll make this the last chart for tonight, as I think my camera's probably only got a few minutes of battery left. But in
Sure.
terms of the hot topic of the Sens not being able to score much lately, this is very poignant as well. This was sort of your idea for what you want to see the Sens do to shuffle their lines, specifically the first line. You think that this would be sort of the ideal setup for the Sens in their current situation and with how these players play. So Tkachuk, Pinto, and Batherson, what makes you think that this is the way to go for the first line?
So I'll dive into what we have on the chart right now and then go over how that relates to some of their numbers they've had in the past. But looking specifically at how we have here is on the center, we have a radar chart similar to the comparison dashboard. But the different colors correspond to which player is contributing the most in each of these aspects. For example, Batherson is in the pink red, which means he's the one that's bringing the most passing, transition attack, and exits to that line. Pinto in the yellow is suppression and the transition defense, so obviously more of the defensive thing. And this is a very, I'd say, prototypical line in a sense that you have Pinto as your more defensively inclined guy to cover. Batherson is your dynamic playmaker who's bringing all the neutral zone value through the transition and the zone exits and the passing. And Brady's that power forward who's going to generate a lot of offense through his ability to get a lot of pucks on net, really drive there, and use his forechecking everywhere. So as a result, you get this sort of power first line as it's automatically designated by the code I've written for it. And we can see the kind of chemistry boost they get together. 1.3 is pretty strong for what we have with these players, and I think really helps them to get to that quote unquote first line, because you might not, Pinto's not a first liner. You would say Batherson is maybe borderline that, Tkachuk is, but putting all those together and how they really fit together as a puzzle really helps bring that up, and I think could be interesting to have. And what really interests me there is I was doing a little bit of diving into the time they've spent together over the last few years, and they haven't spent any time together at all this year. So you look at how they've been doing in previous seasons. Sure enough, it was the second most played line in the entire Sens team last year with 272 minutes together, and they had gotten a 56.6 expected goal share. It's the highest of any line with players that they still have here and played at least 100 minutes. And, especially with Norris being out, then you start wondering, maybe this is what you roll. And as a result, to fill out the top six, I was thinking you obviously put Stützle with Shihou, and then you can kind of use that sixth spot in the top six. When Norris comes back, you can put him there and give Stützle a shooter, perhaps, while you still have him out. You could kind of use it circumstantially in the sense where if you want more overall value, maybe you put a Mario. If you want to bring more grit or something like that, or potential scoring, you bring Perron, more dynamic offense, you bring Gaudette. You really use that as a sort of X factor spot that can help you fill a top six. And as a result, you get a very nice balanced approach to your offense. And it could really, catch other teams off guard, because you have these different layers of attack through your lineup, and it could really help them potentially break out of their funk there.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the line last season, because I remembered that when Pinto came back from his suspension, they put him with Tkachuk pretty much right away, but I forgot who the right winger was, and as you said, it was Batherson. And Pinto came back from that suspension doing way better than I think anyone could have realistically expected from him, considering
it was the best stretch in the league.
So many games, yeah.
Easily.
So considering he's in more of a scoring slump this season, it's been running hot and cold for him. Obviously, it's not just throw the guy in the top six and he'll get points. But specifically pointing out, I like this line, having the success last season. I feel like that might be something for them to try to go back to. And yeah, as you said, it's just super balanced. I like the way that the chart is visualized there with showing what each guy really brings to the line, who is the strongest at each sort of important part of the game there. So yeah, I would have to agree that this would be a setup that I'd like to see the Sens go back to. It's been good in the past, and at this point they got to try some new things that they haven't done yet this season. I don't think we've seen much of Pinto with Tkachuk, and also in terms of each guy bringing different elements of the game too, I feel like when they have Stützle and Batherson together, for example, I feel like that's too much of just playmaking and stick handling being like their main abilities, and
Yeah,
they kind of
you got to
just
leave some for the rest of the lineup.
yeah, exactly. So even though Stützle should be your first line center, technically, it's kind of the situation where you would play the first and second lines pretty equally, and Stützle would obviously get the power play time ahead of Pinto. But just in terms of the dynamic of putting three different players together, I really like how this works, because sometimes Stützle doesn't necessarily click. He definitely isn't clicking with Batherson lately. Anytime that they've tried it, just Batherson having one goal in the last 18 games at this point. That's I don't think
Man.
Stützle and Batherson work together. So I like this setup, and I like the way that your card here has it visualized.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm honestly surprised they just haven't tried it given the success they had last year and how much they played them. Like
Yeah.
Pinto only played half the season, and this was almost the most played line on the entire team
Oh, for
last
the
year.
whole season too. It wasn't just like
Yeah.
during the games
No,
that he
not
played.
just during that
Wow.
stretch. You look at minutes played at 5-on-5 together, and number one is Stützle Giroux Joseph at 305 minutes. Number two, Kachuk Pinto Batherson at 272, and then a huge drop to 158 of Kachuk Norris Giroux. It's not
Wow.
even close. They're in a
Holy
completely
crap.
different class of their own.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess maybe it's just different coaches preferring different setups, but you got to think that
yeah.
Travis Green could take a look at those stats and be like, "Hey, maybe I should try doing what Jacques Martin was doing there."
Yeah, he may have been cooking with that one. Listen, I like what it does for the rest of your top six and how you can kind of build your own second line based on whatever situation you want. Because let's be honest, Timmy can carry his line, and if as long as you know what you're doing with him and you're deploying him properly, and that's the thing is Pinto's going to get points just by existing on this line with Kachuk and Batherson at the
Mm-hmm.
very least. And I think it's giving him the best chance because moving forward, you need him to break out of that slump. And if you want to have a chance of playoffs, you need all of your guys running. So I think this does the best, both on the player side, on the team side, and just overall as it descends into the lineup and the impacts there. And even when Norris comes back, as I said, I know they don't like playing him on the wing, but you have three guys that can take draws on a potential line of Norris, Stützle, Giroux, and I think it'd be really interesting. You could have so much skating and athleticism ability between Stützle and Norris there, and you have that dynamic passer with a shooter like Norris who brings defensive effort at the very least. I know his defensive numbers aren't great, but he tries. So that it could be nice to see. Maybe he learned something from Stützle and his defensive improvements there, and he finally establishes himself as a two-way center as well, right? I'd like to see how those two work together, and that would be a direct consequence of having that Kachuk Pinto Batherson line together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love all those ideas, and I think ending on that specifically fits in well to the topic of tonight of how the Sens cannot score any freaking goals.
No.
Before we wrap up, just a quick shout out to Newbie Sports saying, do we think they'll score next game? So next game being the Battle of Ontario as the Sens
Oh my God.
host the Maple Leafs. So oh my God,
Please.
if they don't score next game, then that's gonna be like a real problem. Like right now it feels like a little blip on the radar, but if it continues into next game, holy crap, especially against the Leafs.
Yeah, especially with a potential, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but a potential given how the playoff seeding has been, could
Oh
be a
yeah.
future matchup. If they
Yep.
get shut up by the Leafs, it's not going to be a fun time anywhere in the city, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be really depressing.
I've been to one Sens versus Leafs game, which was 2 years ago, which was a Leafs 3-0 win. They didn't score. I'm going again on
Yikes.
Saturday, so if I sit through another Leaf shutout in the CTC, I'm going to actually become the Joker at that point, I think. So,
Yeah,
Sens,
honestly, you're brave for going to Sens Leafs games.
yeah,
That I couldn't.
the only way I can handle doing it is if I go with a friend who's a Leafs fan, which is the scenario both of these times. Because like if I'm just sitting there being like unhappy as a Sens fan with other Sens fans around me, and we're surrounded by the Leafs fans, then it just feels really depressing. But at least if I'm with a friend who's a Leafs fan, we can have the back and forth. And if if we do win, then it's like, oh my god, I get to laugh at you. If we do lose, then at least it's like, well,
Then leave
at
me
least my
alone, please.
friends are happy, Yeah. So, but that's pretty much the only way that I'll do it. Up until the one 2 years ago, I had never been to a Sens versus Leafs game, so yeah, I had been avoiding it for a while.
Yeah, I don't think I've been. I honestly I can't even remember a Sens Leafs game that I've been to in person. I can remember the last Sens Habs game I've been to, and I was maybe half the age I am now.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I just don't go to those games because
Yep.
I know it will be so packed with the other team, and I just will be miserable. So I can't do it to myself, and I'm honestly shout out to you for being able to make it there, especially with the Leafs friend. I would get so mad if the Sens were losing and my buddy was just there being happy. I just,
Oh
oof,
God, yeah.
it's tough.
Hopefully I'll be able to handle it. I think last time that I went was like the first time that I've hit 3 beers at a Sens game. Um, this time I'll be driving, so no drinking. But that probably helped in my ability to get through the experience that
It's
time.
true.
So we'll see how it is sober this time. Hopefully the Sens can actually score some goals and make it not so painful this time. But before we wrap up, just going to say, if you're enjoying the show, you probably want more of this, right? Well, make sure you hit the like button on this video, click subscribe on our channel, and make sure you check the notification bell so you're alerted when we go live. If you're listening to our podcast, please give us a 5-star rating or even write a positive review. And if you really like us, make sure to follow us on your favorite social media platforms. You can find the Game Over Network on Blue Sky at thegameovernetwork.com, which is the handle, which is the URL for the website. That's the Blue Sky handle. On TikTok, Twitter, we are at Game Over NHL. On Instagram, Threads, and LinkedIn, at Game Over Network. And we have, of course, all of our hosts' social medias linked in the description below. Currently, we've got a link to the Zoobcast down there, and I will be adding the LB hockey link for the VOD. Do you want to plug any of your socials?
Yeah, you can follow me at so Louis at Louis Boulet, all one word. My name at Blue Sky dot social. You can find me on Blue Sky there. You can find me on Twitter. I don't really post that much there anymore, but because
Yeah, trying to
obvious
weed that
reasons.
out.
Yeah, agreed. It's awful over there. So yeah, you can find me on Blue Sky. You can find the LB Hockey account on Blue Sky. You can find the Zoopcast account on Blue Sky. That's pretty much the main place that we post now. So if you want to keep up with any sort of stuff, I usually post maybe not daily. I'm trying to post more about updates there and any sort of charts. So feel free to follow there and obviously check out the LB Hockey website. It's been a labor of love of mine for a few years now, and I gotta say it's been the best time I've been having in the hockey community for sure. So feel free to check it out if you're a nerd like me and you love your hockey.
Yeah, definitely check out lbhockey.com. It's been awesome to see you be able to launch this now because I remember a couple years ago you were talking about how it's in the works, and I was excited to see how it turns out, and it's awesome. So totally recommend everyone to check that out as well. That'll do it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me, Louis, and thank you everyone for watching. Click like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you are not already. Have a good night.